All right, so a couple things to keep in mind when it comes to reading comprehension. First of all, right, your section is 35 minutes as usual, and you have 4 reading comp passages, just like you have 4 games, which means on average you have 8 to 9 minutes per passage. But realistically, some of us may be spending 7 minutes on easier passages and 11, 12 minutes on harder passages. Also, realistically, many of us maybe shouldn't even be finishing reading comp. Maybe we should be trying to do 2 passages or 3 passages and do them very well and just guess on the remaining questions in the section. So what does that mean in practice? You just go through the section, and then when you get to the 5-minute warning, you bubble in the remaining answer choices, and then you go back and you just keep working until the timer runs out. Okay? So the reason for that is that, let's say that you're getting 15 out of 25, right? Let's say that's what you get in reading comp. Well, that means you're getting 10 questions wrong. If you slow down and you do 3 passages and you do them very well, and you get, let's say, 18 out of the 19 questions from those 3 passages correct, well, okay, you're already at 18 rather than 15, right? So that's 3 points higher. And if you guess on the remaining questions in the passage, in the last passage, you're probably going to get 1 or 2 of those correct. And by guess, I mean you just select C for the last passage, right?
Yeah, I thought I read that, in the guide, and I wasn't clear what the rationale behind that is.
Behind guessing?
I mean, guessing the same.
It actually, I don't think it matters. You can guess any letter, but I would prefer, if I'm going to guess at that 5-minute warning, to just guess the same letter. That way, as you're going through the section, it's very clear to you where you started guessing and where you did not. Not only during the section, but also when you're done with the section and you're reviewing it, you're like, oh, this is where I started guessing. Like, and so you, like, if you have it random, then it's like, well, did I even guess in this section? Like, in a couple weeks, you're not going to remember. But during the test, I think it's just easier. And thankfully, with the digital test now, if you end up getting to any of those questions in the time, you just hit another answer choice and it changes. Where in the past, people were bubbling and then they were erasing, and that was pain. But the idea is just you're probably going to get 20% of those correct. And since it doesn't matter which letter you guess, you might as well just guess the same one. And so now you're getting 18 correct from the first 3 passages, plus maybe another 1 or 2. That's 20 correct. Instead of 15 out of 28, you're now getting 20 out of 28, right? Now, ideally, we get to a point where we're doing 3 passages really well, and we can start to answer 1 or 2 questions from the 4th passage. And that actually takes a decent amount of time, because what can happen is if you get to a point where you're doing 3 passages very well, to answer the first question in the 4th passage, you have to read it, right? So you spend like 4 minutes reading it, and then you start to answer the question. So you may get to a point where you're like, hey, I can do 3 passages, and then I can read half of the 4th passage. Well, what's the point of reading? I'm just not doing anything except reading the first half of this 4th passage. Well, that's okay. Like, look at that as a success, right? And then eventually get to 3/4 of that passage, then all of that passage, then the first question. That's progress. Instead of doing the reverse, which is like finishing the section and then trying to increase your score. Because if you rush through the section, then you're never really going to give yourself the opportunity to learn how to get to the correct answer correctly. It's easier to do that and then slowly speed up that than it is to just like always just go fast and then hope that it starts clicking. So in any case, now because a lot of us will be doing 3 passages, you may decide strategically to choose which 3 you do. When it comes to choosing the passages, I would suggest just assume you're going to go in order, and the only time you're probably going to skip is maybe the 2nd passage or the 3rd passage if it's on a topic you know you're going to hate. So some people, they know they hate the law passages, which is interesting. But, I can understand. They're very wordy, and it just reminds me of law school. But in any case, for a lot of people, it's the natural science passages. But you'll know in the first sentence. Because the passages are either going to be law, humanities, natural sciences, or social sciences. So first sentence, right, when they start talking about a spider, you're like, okay, this is a natural science passage. And if that's the third passage, you may decide right then and there to skip it. It's okay to skip a passage if you're doing it right away. What you don't want to do is invest a ton of time in a passage and then be like, well, I don't like this, and then move on, because now you're allocating your time inefficiently throughout the section, right? Okay, when it comes to reading the passages, I would say for most people, this is not always the case, but for most people, they spend like 1 to 2 minutes reading the passage, and then 7 to 8 minutes reading or doing the questions. But I would encourage you to realign those proportions. Okay? In other words, like they're kind of like blasting through the passage, and then they're kind of slowing down and evaluating each answer choice, and then often going back and rereading paragraphs and stuff like that, right? I would say increase the amount of time you spend on the passage so you can decrease the amount of time you spend on the questions. It's the same thing that we do in the games, right? Imagine if you just read the game setup, and then you're like, sweet, let's go answer questions, and you didn't write anything down, right? That's not, you're going to spend time so then you can fly through the questions. I find myself spending anywhere from 3.5 to 5 minutes on the passage, which is a decent chunk of time considering that we're going to shoot for 7 to 9 minutes for these passages. So it's not quite, but it's almost a 50-50 ratio. But the thing is, when you have a solid understanding of the passage, like as you're going through the answer choices, as you read them, you're like, I don't know where this was discussed, but I know this is wrong. Or I know this is right because I remember the author saying this, right? Whereas if you fly through the passage, you generally don't remember, and you're going back and like being, what was exactly said? So that's kind of the goal. What does it mean to read? The great thing about reading comprehension, the reading comprehension section on the LSAT, is that it really does test your ability to read convoluted garbage, right? Like, what they do is they find these passages in law journals, they find them in scholarly articles, and sometimes they find them in like Time magazine, but the ones that they find from publications like Time is they rewrite them. Like there was one on monkeys once, and I was like, oh, this is kind of remotely interesting. And I went to the back, and I don't know if we have it in this book, but in the back of each test, on an official test, they'll give you the original article, the source material for the reading comp passage. And it was like Time magazine. I was like, wait, how could this be from Time magazine? It was so poorly written, this would never get like published, right? Someone would be fired. And then I looked up the article, and it's like, oh, it's written clearly, engagingly, in all these ways, and they had taken it and they had adopted it and then rewrote it. So what they like to do is they like to use abstractions. They use things that are called nominalizations. Does anyone know what a nominalization is? It's where you take a verb and you turn it into a noun. So instead of saying, I applied for the job, you say something like, I submitted an application for the job.
Zombie nouns.
Zombie nouns.
That's what we call them at our work.
Oh, okay. Sure. Zombie nouns. They really could be verbs, right? But someone has taken them and turned them into an ION word. So like application or rejection or discussion, as opposed to discussing or rejecting or whatever, right? Well, the thing about nouns is that they don't stick into your mind as directly as verbs. But what you can do is as you read these sentences, you can slow down a little bit and say, wait a sec, okay, what are you trying to say? And translate it into a visualization. If you translate it into a visualization, then you can start to see people saying things, people doing things, things happening, right, in the world. And then you've taken that sentence in and you've understood it, right? That's the real goal. There's only 15 sentences in these passages. 15 to 17.
15 to 70?
17.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, no.
I was
No, there's like 70, maybe 70 lines at most, but sentences, there's only 15. So what you want to do is after each sentence, just be like, okay, do I understand what you're trying to say to me? Do I get it? If you don't get it, just reread it. So what happens sometimes with reading is that people will be reading along, right? And your mind is thinking about something else. Maybe you're thinking about the timing in the section or the person next to you who's like making some annoying noise. And then you're like, oh, wait, I'm right here? I don't remember what I'm reading about. That's not good. You want to catch that as soon as you don't understand something. So you read the first sentence and I'm stopping and I'm like, okay, I get that. And it's like, we're talking 5 seconds of just like pausing and like sitting on whatever they're saying. But you take those 5 seconds and you turn that into an idea as opposed to just a bunch of words, then you're ready for the next sentence. Now, what sometimes happens is you read and then you sit there and you're like, I don't know what you're trying to say. I don't get it. Like, you made it abstract. So then you read it again. And when you read it again, you still are like, huh? But on your second read through, and this will happen a lot with these super hard sentences, is you may come up with 2 potential interpretations. Sometimes 3, but usually just 2. That is a huge win, even if you don't know which interpretation is correct. Because what's the norm? The norm is you read a convoluted sentence, it doesn't make sense, and you just plow ahead hoping that there will be more clarity in the next sentence, right? But usually what ends up happening is you start making assumptions about what was said, and you start filling in gaps, and then the wrong answers play into those assumptions. But one way to fix this is to stop yourself and say, whoa, okay, I don't understand, and you read it again, and then you still don't understand. Now, what I'm trying to illustrate here is the stages of reading comprehension. So most people just plow ahead. Some people start to understand, okay, wait, if I don't understand a sentence, I need to go back and I need to read it again. But when they read it again and they still don't understand, they kind of give up and they go, okay, well, now I'm going to go forward into this next sentence. That's better than just plowing ahead the initial time. At least you gave it another shot, right? But the ideal would be like, okay, I'm still a little confused, but here are my 2 guesses as to what I think you're trying to say. Now, what's so immensely valuable about this is that I can't think of a situation in which this hasn't been resolved. As soon as you start reading the second sentence, after making those 2 predictions, one of those predictions becomes extraordinarily obvious, right? You're like, oh, you have to be meaning this, right? Now, sometimes it doesn't, but at some point in the passage, it will become very clear which interpretation was correct. But usually it's the immediate next sentence. But if you don't make those 2 predictions, then when you read this next sentence, there's still this, like, I don't know how else to describe it except for, like, cloudiness. Like, there's a little bit of a haze as to what's going on, right? It's not that you don't know anything. You get done, when we get done with these passages, everybody's like, well, yeah, this is about tigers. We got that, right? But it's like, what exactly are they saying? Are they saying that this is good? Are they saying this is bad? Do they want you to do something? Do they have an opinion on it? Does someone else has an opinion on it? Like, can you get that clarity? Can you see the different arguments that are being made in the passage? Or are you blurring them all together as one? Right? They're going to test you on that. This is why this section is so interesting, because you get so many people who are like, I read so much in college and I hate this section. It's like, yeah, but if you had to read like a lot of stuff, you didn't necessarily get drilled on what individual sentences were saying or exactly how they should be interpreted. But this is getting us very close to contract interpretation, right? Like lawyers, they go out and you have a paragraph of garbage and people are suing each other over that. They're like, no, I think it says this, and the other person says, no, I think it says this. It's all about what does each sentence say and how do they interact, right? So they're trying to get us to that level. And reading comp gives us an opportunity to test 2 things. One is these details that I'm talking about, these details. And the second thing is the overall structure. You are tested on structure and logical reasoning, but not as much. Right? Reading comp we really have an opportunity to have a bunch of sentences together and see how they all relate on a bigger scale. Okay? So, as you're going through the passage, I would suggest you read a sentence and then you just say, okay, like, do I get what you're trying to tell me? There's somebody sitting behind this passage writing to you. Do you get what they're trying to say? If you don't, maybe you need to read it again. If you still don't understand, maybe you need to dig in and make some predictions, and then you keep going. As you're going through the passage, it doesn't hurt to every now and then step back and ask yourself, or really ask the author, why are you writing this? Like, what is it that you're ultimately trying to tell me? Right? If you step back, what you're doing is you're giving yourself the opportunity to see the big picture. And so readers tend to fall into two categories. Again, this is a generalization. But readers tend to either be good at understanding details, but not good at understanding structure, or they're good at understanding structure, but they're not good at understanding details. And half the questions are going to test structure, half the questions are going to test detail. It's very rare that they ask you to strengthen or weaken the argument. That does happen, but that's just like super rare. So half the reading comp is structure, half is details. And so what we're doing here is we're reading for details and trying to understand what exactly are you telling me. And then when we pause every now and then and just kind of recap and step back, right, and think, okay, whoa, like I get what you said to me. Why are you saying this? Like, what's the bigger picture here? Then you're getting yourself ready for structure questions, right? That's it. That's what reading comp is. It's digging in and trying to understand what they're saying and then stepping back. Digging in, stepping back. Digging in, stepping back. And if you do that, when you get done with the passage, you have to do the ultimate step back. You're done with the passage and you're like, okay, what was the point of all this? The point was they tend to either be trying to persuade you of something or they're just trying to inform you of something. Right? There's persuasive passages and there's informative passages. Persuasive passages have some sort of conclusion. They're like, okay, I want you to come to believe this idea. Informative passages, they're just telling you, hey, this happened and this happened, this other thing happened, and so on. Right? If you can't identify the main point in your own words at the end of the passage, then I would suggest scanning back over the passage, just really quickly, just scanning back over. You don't need to reread it, but as you scan down the passage, what will happen is you'll remember, oh yeah, at the beginning they were talking about these other people, and then they went into this discussion about why this is bad, and then they went back and said, no, they think it's actually good. And then it's easier for you to get the big picture, right? Let me step back and synthesize and put everything together, okay? If you can do that, then those are the core skills for reading comp. We'll talk about individual strategies for reading comp questions as we go through them, but like this is the most important part. Like the different question types and stuff like that really kind of falls to the background once you understand the passage and how to become a better reader. Yeah?
With the iPad, are you able to annotate the passage at all? Or?
So on the official test you can.
Okay.
In Demon 2.0 you will be able to. It's coming, we're working on it right now, but that functionality is not there yet. But yeah, you will be able to. There are some disadvantages in my mind with annotating. For one, you can't take notes. I don't think you can, at least. I think when I took the digital LSAT officially, like the trial run, the first one, I think you could take notes, but then the second one you couldn't. I can't remember now. But if you're going to even take notes at all, you're probably just going to do it on scrap paper, because you will have scrap paper and you can do that. But the thing that's interesting about taking notes is that taking notes is something we do a lot in classes, right, in college, and it's like we're really doing it because we're going to need to know that information in 2 weeks. We're going to need to know it in 2 months, right? And we want to like kind of step back and get the big picture for the course. This is 8 minutes. And so if taking notes helps you organize the structure, maybe that's good. But it's not really going to be good for understanding details, because that's really going to happen the second you pause and think and like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. And a lot of times when you see what someone's saying, you don't need to take notes. I mean, I've been talking here for, I don't know, 10 minutes. And if you're following along, you're like, okay, I'm getting the idea. And then if I were to quiz you on it, you could, maybe notes would be helpful, but it's like what's more important is that you understand what's being said. How many times have we taken notes and then we miss things, and then it's like it's weird. It's almost like the notes become a hindrance. So what's interesting for people who do take notes a lot is that if you tell them to not take notes, they have this anxiety like, oh, I'm going to miss something. But then because you have to understand it, it's like they then just decide to remember it. It's weird. So I would experiment, basically, bottom line, with not taking notes. Yeah, other questions? Okay, so just to recap, as you're going through the passage, try to understand each sentence, make sure you're getting it as you read it, and then in the back of your mind be asking yourself, why are you telling me this? Why? Like, what is the point of you sitting down? You must have had some message you wanted someone else to get. What is that message? If you focus on those two things, understanding sentences, and then asking yourself, why are you writing this? You're effectively focusing on the details and the structure at the same time. So you're taking care of both birds. One stone? Yeah. Anyways. Okay. Last thing I will say about reading comp, as you're going through the individual questions, and we'll do this as we go over them together, but for the vast majority of questions, you want to make a loose prediction of the answer before you go into the 5 answer choices. So I will read the question, and then I will make a prediction, and then I'll read the 5 answer choices. Now sometimes people, they'll go from one extreme to another. One extreme is you don't make any prediction at all, right? You're just like, read question, okay, does A sound good? Does B sound good? Okay, that's one extreme. The other extreme is to predict the exact answer. That's pretty much impossible. So sometimes you can, but that's way too much work too. It's this happy medium of like, what does the author think about tigers in the savannah? Well, he thinks that they're a valuable resource for the people. I don't know. I have no idea what the author would think, right? But this is a loose prediction. Valuable resource. Good. Sometimes my prediction is good versus bad. That's it. But doing that, again, it puts you in this mindset of like you're trying to think through the process as opposed to just letting it passively, right, be thrown at you. You're like, oh, well, what do I think about A? Or what do I think about B? It's like you're going to take a half second to sort of frame your opinion, even if it's a very simple opinion, even if it's very basic. But then that's going to help you as you go through the answer choices. Because you're like, oh, no, that's going in the other direction. Cool. All right. Let's give it a go.